Hi, it's Steve. Today we'd like to show you how to change the tub support or spider assembly on your front load washer. It's a really easy job. Let me show you how we do it. Now to do this repair, we'll need access to both the front of the washer and the rear of the washer. So the first thing we'll need to do is to disconnect the inlet hoses, the drain hose, as well as the power. Once we've done that, we'll pull the washer far enough forward that we can access the back panel. Now that we have access to the back of the washer, we'll begin by taking the main top off. And to do this, we'll remove those two screws on the lower half of that support. And just pull back on that top. Once we've released the keyhole slots, the tabs, you can simply lift that off and we'll set it aside. And while we're still at the back, we'll remove the 4 screws that secure that access panel. And just lift up on it slightly. That will release the tabs on the bottom, slide it down to remove it, and then we'll set that aside. Now again, since we're at the rear of the machine, our next step will be to remove that single bolt that holds the rotor to the tub support. Now using a 17mm socket, I'm just going to give that a sharp snap to break it free. And we'll set that aside so that we can reuse it later. Then we'll also pull that rotor off of that shaft. So just grasp 2 edges of it, wiggle it back and forth, and slide it off of that spline shaft. Now there are magnets all the way around the inside of that rotor, and they will tend to grab the magnet, so you'll need to pull it sharply to get it off of there. Then we'll set that aside. Now while we're still at the back of the washer, our next step will be to remove the single screw, which is in the top right-hand corner, facing the front of the washer, that secures the control panel to the washer frame. We can also reach in and disconnect the 2 wire harnesses that run from the harness assembly to that control panel. So first we'll disconnect those 2 wire harnesses, release the little restraint, and depress that locking tab and separate the 2 ends. And now we'll turn the washer around so that we can access the front. Well, next we're going to remove the detergent drawer. So simply pull it out all the way, press down on that release tab in the center, and slide it out. Now located behind that drawer, there are 2 screws that need to be removed. Just make sure that we keep those 2 screws separate. They're a stainless steel longer screw than the rest of them that we'll be taking out. So set those aside. And then you'll note the tabs under the top edge of that console. We're simply going to lift up and roll forward to disengage those. And once we've freed them all, we simply lift it up, tilt it forward, pull the harness through that opening, and then we'll set that aside. Now our next step, to open the door up, we're going to remove the spring clamp that secures that door bellows to the front panel. Now using either a flat blade screwdriver or a pair of needle nose pliers, go down into about the 6 o'clock position. You'll see a spring there with a hook on either end of it. You simply grasp that hook, roll that spring out over the bottom of the bellows, and then lift it off, and we'll set that aside. You can then peel that bellows away from the front panel. And then just tuck it back inside the opening. And then close that door up. Now next we'll open this access door in the bottom left-hand corner. Just tilt it down and lift the tabs out. We'll remove single screw. And then we need to remove that insert. So unclip the drain hose and just push that insert slightly to the left. You may need a flat blade screwdriver to go into that little opening. Pry it loose, and we'll set that aside. Now next, we have a single Phillips head screw that attaches that bottom edge of that front panel to the washer frame. And we'll need to remove that as well. Set these aside. Now next we have 4 screws across the top of that front panel securing it to the frame. We'll remove those. Carefully support that door and front panel assembly as you remove the last screw. So just carefully tilt that front panel forward enough that we can reach down inside. We'll need to disconnect the wire harness connector to the door lock assembly. So simply depress the locking tab and then pull that harness connector away from the latch assembly. Now with the connector removed, we're next going to release this wire harness holder. You push to the outside to release the tab, lift the harness out, and now we can lift the front panel away from the frame. Now with the wire harness removed, we'll simply lift up on that front panel, lift it off of those 3 tabs on the frame, and then we'll set that assembly aside. Now our next step will be to remove the counterweights from the front of that tub. They're held in place with 10mm bolts, so we'll just remove all of those. Once you've removed all 4 bolts, we're simply going to lift that off and then carefully set it aside. Now we'll do the same for the top counterweight. You may need to pull down on that tub assembly to access the 2 center bolts on the top. Now, once we've removed those 4 bolts, again, we're just going to pry that counterweight away from the tub. Now, you may need to push back on the tub, get enough clearance to pull it down through, and then carefully set that one aside. Now, next we'll want to remove the hinge pins for these tub dampers. The easiest way to remove these hinge pins is using a 1/2 inch or 13mm deep socket. We'll slide it onto the pointed end of those hinge pins, and that will depress the locking tab. Just hold that in place. Take a pair of pliers, grasp the front of that pin. You may be able to pull it straight out. Once you get it out a little ways, you can get the pliers in underneath of it. You can then pry it out. Try not to damage it. And then we'll save it for reuse. And we'll set that aside so that we can reuse it later. So now we'll just remove those 10mm bolts. And then set them aside for reuse after. Move to the other side. And then we can remove the 3 across the top. Now with all the bolts removed, our next step will be to release the spring from the oval-shaped hole on the sides of those front and rear outer tubs so that we'll be able to separate them. And to do that, we'll need to remove the retainer at the top of the spring. Simply pop that out. That will allow us to lift up on the spring to release that top hook. Carefully lower the tub down. You can support it if you wish. Tilt the spring. Unhook it from the front portion. Rehook it back into the hole for the back half of the tub. Lift the assembly back up and drop the hinge into the retainer at the top. And just repeat for the other side. Now that we have the both front and rear outer tubs separated from each other, we can pull that front portion forward and push down on it slightly to get it out through that opening. And then we'll just set that aside. And then just grasp the inner basket, pull it forward. If it doesn't move easily, you'll need to go to the back of the washer and tap that shaft from the back side. Now we suggest that you take a small block of wood or something to tap that shaft with so that we don't damage the bearings. And then grasp the tub again from the front and see if we can pull it the rest of the way out. Now that we have the basket out of the washer, we're now ready to take that tub support or spider assembly off of that inner basket. It's held in place with 6 bolts that go in from the outside edge of the basket. They're a 10mm bolt, and they have a thread locker on that bolt, so they may be difficult to get out or they may break. So it's probably a good idea to purchase new replacement bolts before you attempt this repair, just in case you break them. They're a metric thread and they may be difficult to find. So we'll just go ahead and take those bolts off. Now you note that we're using some protective gloves when removing these bolts. The outside of this tub has perforated holes through it, obviously, and sometimes they can be a little bit sharp, and if you slip on that bolt, you will probably remove some flesh from your hands. So it's always a good idea to wear some protective gloves. Now that we've removed all of the bolts, we can lift that old assembly out. You may need a large flat blade screwdriver to get in underneath the edge somewhere to get a purchase on it. Now with all of the bolts removed, we can then lift that assembly out of there. And because these holes have become countersunk, it may be fairly snug in there, so you may need a flat blade screwdriver to coax it along a bit. Just be careful that you don't damage the inner basket when trying to remove this. So don't pry too hard on it. Once we've removed the pieces or the complete assembly from the inner basket, we'll next want to tap out those screw holes just to knock that countersink back a little bit so that the new piece will fit in easier. Just verify that all of the bolt holes line up properly. Now, if you were able to save the original bolts, you will want to add some thread locker to them before you reinstall them. If you've purchased new bolts, you'll note that it already has that coating on them. We were able to save ours, so we'll just add a little bit of thread locker. A few drops is all that's required. We suggest that you install all 6 bolts before you tighten them down, just to make sure that they will line up properly. Now, once we have them all snug, we can then go ahead and tighten them up. Make sure that you don't over tighten them and break them off. And again, you'll note that we're wearing protective gloves. Just in case our hands slip, we won't cut ourselves on the outside of that inner basket. Now, once we have that spider assembly mounted to the basket, just make sure that the surfaces where the bearings are going to sit are clean and free of any gouges or dirt. And we'll also inspect the seal area. If the seal has been damaged or there's signs of rust on those bearings, you'll need to replace both the seal and the bearings. And then make sure that that area is nice and clean. And once we have that seal cleaned up or replaced, we'll also want to put a little bit of seal grease on the face of that, just so that we have a nice tight seal against that spider assembly. Then we'll lift it up into place, guide it gently into that bearing set, and then we can tighten it in place. Should turn nice and smoothly in those bearings. Now, before we attempt to put the outer tub in place, we'll want to inspect that gasket seal that goes between the 2 tubs. Make sure it's not twisted or that there's no excess debris in that area that may cause a water leak. So clean that up, and then we'll put the outer tub in place. Now that we have the basket installed into the rear outer tub, you could at this point choose to reinstall the rotor and the bolt to hold it in place, although it's not necessary. And our next step will be to put the front outer tub half in place. Again, make sure that the gasket is seated into that channel all the way around that rear half. And then when we install the front half of that outer tub, we'll want to make sure that we line up these 3 tabs. Be one at the top and one on each side. We're not going to bolt that in place because we need to just line it up first, remove the suspension spring, and hook them through a hole in both the front half of the tub and the rear half. Now, you'll also note that that tub tends to be tilted up quite a bit because it has no counterweights on it, and it makes it a little more difficult to slide that front half on. Now, you could take the counterweights and just carefully lay them in the inner basket. And that'll provide enough weight in there that it'll hold that tub down so that you can more easily install the front half. So just get it roughly into position. You can then take those counterweights out if you wish. Now we'll lift up on that spring, disengage it from the hook at the top, lower it down, remove it, and then tuck it through both of those holes. So we'll begin by removing this retainer clip at the top of that spring. We're going to lift that spring up, which will be lifting the outer tub and inner basket at the same time. Lift it up enough that we can pull that hook out of the top, slowly lower it down, and then we're going to pivot that spring so that the hook comes out of the slot in that tub. We can then rotate that front half of the tub until it lines up with both holes. We're going to hook that spring through both of them. Then you can rotate that spring, make sure the hook captures both halves of the tub, then lift it up and hook it back in at the top again. At this point, we'll put the retaining clip in place, and then we'll repeat that procedure on the opposite side of the tub. So we'll just lift up on the other side, slowly lower those tubs down, pivot that spring to remove it from the back hole, line the two of them up, and again we'll fit that spring through that opening in both halves of the tub. Make sure it captures both of them, tilt it up into position, and then we'll lift the whole tub assembly up. Now that we have the two halves of that outer tub clamped together, we can go ahead and start installing the screws to retain it in position. Now we'll start with a couple on the bottom, and then we'll go to the top just to make sure that we have everything centered up, and then we'll tighten them afterwards. So we'll just continue to install those bolts around the perimeter of those tubs. Now, once we have all of those bolts secure and tightened, we can then go about putting the counterweights back on the front of the outer tub, and then we'll reinstall the dampers and hinge pins. So just take the counterweight, line it up across the front of the tub, make sure that it sits flush against the tub before we install those bolts. Now these are the larger of the bolts that we removed. And then just tighten them securely. Now we can install the top counterweight. Again, you may need to pull down on that tub to line it up on those studs. Sure it's flush up against the tub, and then install the bolts. And tighten them with the ratchet. And now we can reinstall the dampers and hinge pins. So we'll just extend that damper, the holes line up with that bracket on the outer tub. Take our hinge pin, line it up in that opening, and press it all the way through. And then just do the same on the opposite side. Again, just line up the end of that damper with the openings in the tub. Install that hinge pin. Make sure it's get pushed all the way through. And now we're ready to reinstall the front panel. Now, when reinstalling that front panel, we want to make sure that the 3 slotted openings in the bottom sit over top of these tabs across the front at the base. We're also going to want to make sure that we have the harness for the door lock assembly tucked into that retainer and firmly connected to the door latch assembly. And make sure that the locking tab engages on that harness connector. Carefully lift it into place and then tilt it back against the washer frame. We can then put a couple of screws in to hold it in place. And just remember to reinstall that screw at the bottom of the front panel. Then we can slide that insert and door back in place. So take the insert, slide the drain hose through that small hole, lock the left-hand side in place first, and press the right-hand side in until it clips in. And then clip that drain tube into the holder. Reinstall that retaining screw at the bottom. Engage the hinge on the bottom of the door and latch it in place. Now, when reinstalling that bellows to the front panel, we want to make sure that we take that V-shaped portion of that bellows and set it right into the V groove of the front panel. When that's properly installed, it should lay flush against the front panel. So go all the way around the perimeter, make sure it's properly engaged. Now just verify that it's flush all the way around, and then we can install the wire band clamp. Now when installing that clamp, we want to make sure that the spring is in about the 6 o'clock position. So just tuck the left side of that around that groove in the bellows, making sure that we keep that spring pressed tight up against the bellows and the cabinet. And also verify that that band is sitting firmly down into that groove. Then we'll take a pair of needle nose pliers and we're going to grasp the hook on the end of that wire where it attaches to the spring, and we're going to pull it towards us to stretch the spring, and that will give us enough slack that we can tuck the rest of that wire band down into the groove. Again, check all the way around the perimeter. Make sure that it's completely into that groove in the bellows, so there's no chance of it popping out. And next we'll put the console back on the washer. So we begin by tucking the wire harness ends through that oval opening. Tuck the harnesses into the opening, line up the 4 tabs on the bottom, and make sure that that console sits flat and flush against the front panel. And squeeze the top of it against that metal rail to lock those tabs in place. Then we need to reinstall the screw on the right-hand corner to hold it in place. Then we'll reconnect the wire harnesses. Make sure that they're pushed in all the way and that the locking tabs engage. Make sure the harnesses are inside of that retainer. Now we'll put the detergent drawer back in place. So just make sure that the detergent housing is pulled all the way into that opening on the frame. Then we'll reinstall those 2 stainless steel screws. Reinstall the drawer. Now we'll turn the washer around so we can reinstall the top, the rotor and retaining bolt for the inner basket if you haven't already put that on, and then the access panel on the back. So we'll begin by taking that rotor assembly and we're going to place it over top of the stator, lining up the spline of the shaft with the spline in the center hub of that rotor. Now you'll probably have to pull down on that tub a bit to get it in place. Now there are magnets on the inside of that rotor, so they want to pull it sideways on you. So you may have to wiggle it a little bit until you have the splines lined up. Now, once you have it lined up, pressed into place, you can then take the retaining bolt and pull it on the rest of the way. Just make sure that it's not binding. The bolt should turn easily. It should pull that inner basket back into the rotor. Now, once we have it fully pulled onto that basket shaft, we suggest that you take that bolt back out. Verify that that shaft is flush with the center hub on that rotor. And then we're going to add some thread locker to this bolt so that it doesn't come loose on us. Now, when tightening that bolt, we'll make sure that we have a firm grip on either the rotor itself or have somebody at the front of the washer with the door open holding the inner basket. Make sure it's good and tight. And then we'll put that rear access panel on. So just take the back panel and we're going to line up those 2 tabs on the top with the slotted openings in the back. Press it firmly up into those, line the 2 bottom ones up, let it drop down into place, and that should line up the screw holes. Reinstall the retaining screws. And now we're ready to put the main top on. Now, when installing that main top, we want to make sure that these little hook openings at the front of that main top slide in under these plastic studs on top of the cabinet. Also see that there's 2 more closer to the back. They need to line up as well. So place the top about an inch back of the console. Make sure it sits flat and flush on both sides, and press it forward to hook those tabs in to those studs. Then we'll install the 2 retaining screws. And now we're ready to push the washer back into position.